us from. We're super glad and excited to have you on today's webinar, very special one with a very special guest. If you're watching live, feel free to let us know where you're joining from. I know we have a couple of folks from Nigeria, from Rwanda, and Kenya. Those I specifically remember because we received a couple of questions from them. But if you're from anywhere else, feel free to let us know. We do have a very special guest with us today, and this is going to be like a 30-minute stream. We're going to try to make the best out of it. So generally, this is our agenda. So we'd have like the first 5 minutes, which you're already using now, and then we'd have like another 15 minutes for general Q&A. We have some questions for our guest, and then we will take community questions. So we already have some questions that people have sent in. We'll prioritize those first. And then if there's anyone who has any question on the stream now, you can also ask at the end. So if you can still fill the form if you want to send the questions, but probably not really necessary anymore. You can just leave them in the chat. So feel free to let us know. I'm looking at the comments now. If you're live and you're watching, just say hi. Let us know where you're joining from, and we'll be happy. We're happy to have you generally. And yes, so I'll just quickly introduce our guest, and then we'll just go straight into it. If you're not watching live, you can always replay this and then catch up with most of what we'll be discussing. Our guest for today is Segun Adebayo, and I want to believe probably a lot of you already know him. Segun is the creator of Chakra UI, and that's an award-winning React component library. You might have seen that or not, but we'll talk about most of that today. And Chakra UI has like 2.4 million downloads per month. It's that popular and that's useful. Segun is also the author of several groundbreaking open source projects like Panda CSS, Zag.js, and ArcUI. These are really interesting names, by the way, which we're going to talk about today. And Segun is a firm believer in open source and is excited about building tools that bridge the gap between design and code. And we're excited, super excited to have Segun with us today. Hi, Segun.
Hi, Balaji. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's always, a pleasure for me to share my experience and sort of help and inspire other people, other folks at least, to get into open source and be more productive, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for us to have you, and we're really glad that you're here with us. And we believe our community members would really benefit from the discussions today. And yes, so I do have a couple of questions for you. We'll run through them, and then we'll take some questions from the community members. Let's see as much of that we can cover. And yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, all right. So your public profile says you're a design engineer. It's probably, I haven't seen that in so many places yet. So what does that mean, and how different is it from a software engineer or a front-end engineer?
Oh yeah, so that's like it's been around for quite a while, but it's starting to get an official name. I guess like in the past, say 1 or 2 years or so. So a design engineer is the person that sits between the designer and the front end or software engineer. So pretty much the person that sort of like sits in between to make sure that the design is actually created up to par. Actually the code actually is created up to par with the design, and also sort of gets involved in the creation of UI components, gets involved in the creation of like different accessibility or accessible pieces of the application. And always you need that person that geeks out on colors, on animations, on transitions and stuff, because I think over time, the industry I've noticed that like if you give that job to a designer, it's a bit too much because they don't know how to code. But if you give that job to a front end engineer at the same time, it's too much because they have 2 weeks sprint. They need to ship this thing quickly. So would you give that job to? So it's somewhat like a middle ground role that is very niche, usually for folks that are both experienced in design and engineering. So it's like you have extreme knowledge in both sides, and you can put them together and actually be productive for help your company actually like ship faster.
That sounds interesting. That's like getting best of both worlds. That's really interesting. And I'm curious to see anyone who probably fits in the same intersection or who's curious about what this feels like. Probably you have like both product design and engineering experience. But yeah, thank you for that, Segun. We're getting into the open source stuff now. So how did you find your way into open source, and like what was your first interaction?
Yeah, my experience, like my window into open source was quite like unconventional, to be honest. I started off as a designer. I mean, did lots of freelance gigs as a designer back then with Fiverr and Upwork and all the things. I got bored after a while. I think maybe when I made a bit too much money, I just decided to just like relax a bit, like just, I mean, let's just take a break here. So in between that zone, my mind was kind of curious about what I could do next with my time. So I just like, I mean, I could build a product. So I started building a product, sort of like a SaaS for like creating your resumes. So while I was building that product, I was learning how to code at the same time. So I had my friends teach me how to code React and styled components back in the day. And then the cool thing is all the things we did then, I was just like, I can't let this thing go to waste. I mean, even though we are struggling to make this product work and to get customers, like at least we can do something with this code we have. And then that's where the idea came. Like, I mean, you could do it open source, but if you try open source, the guys on that street are not smiling because they can really deal with you if you mess up or stuff like this, right? And I mean, 5 or 6 years ago when they said it, I didn't really understand, but now I actually like. I mean, it's sort of like a lived experience for me, so I get the gist of why the warning was that time. But in my naive way, I'm just like, I mean, there's no problem. Let's just do it anyways. Like, I mean, I mean, you're not gonna die from it, so let's try it. So I put it. I sort of managed to put all my code together in this GitHub repo, push it, made it public. Not much branding and stuff. I'm a huge anime fan, so I just like I don't know the name to call. Let's just call it chakra because I like the word chakra from like the animes I watch. So like let's just put chakra, put UI since the UI component library, and that's where it started off, to be honest. And from there, it's been like a wild journey. Of course, I can keep going on, but I'll sort of cap it here. So yeah, more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, you already even chipped into further questions down the line around chakra UI, and you did make very good points about the fact. And I think people have that fear when it comes to putting stuff out in that sense. Where so for you at that point, how were you able to overcome that fear, knowing fully well that you weren't sure? I don't know if you were sure if what you did was like perfect in that sense, but how were you able to bridge that fear?
I think I didn't really care so much about the outcome of like what's gonna come of it. I think it's just when you care too much or you invest your emotions a bit too much into what you make, that's when you actually get to like attached to it and it can break your heart if someone tells you that it's not making sense.
Yeah,
You just go down for the whole weekend, like you're
I
not even
can
going
I
to
can
talk to
relate.
anyone. Yeah, that's
I
I
can
just try to
relate.
detach myself from that outcome, and I think on a practical level, to be honest, too, there's that element of, I mean, I'm not in a pressure. Maybe I'm not doing this because I'm looking for a job. Because I told you earlier, I done like freelancing
Yeah,
gigs and stuff. So I was okay with the freelance world, technically speaking. So it's just like, this is just like a next, let me just figure out what to do here.
you're
And that's all. But I think,
experimenting.
yeah, experimenting and figuring out like where my next time investment should go into. And that's sort of how I sort of like got in mostly.
All right, that's really interesting. Thank you for that, Segun. So, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced when starting your career in open source, and how did you overcome them? You've mentioned one of that already, but if there's anyone else you want to share,
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, my career in open source is almost identical to my career in development in that sense. So, open source started like roughly, I mean, I did design for say 4 or 5 years and I switched to development. So, when I switched to development, I was almost in maybe year one and 6 months ish of development. So I wasn't in like I didn't have like all the big experience or knowledge at that time. So you can imagine a creator creating something and then you're going putting and making it open against all the guys that have been in this industry for like OGs for years. And then sort of like I think the challenge there is first of all a skill challenge. Like, are you skilled enough to be able to manage the complexities of this kind of project? So that's really where the first challenge came from. And the way I solved that, of course, is kind of like, I mean, you have to rapidly upskill yourself. It's a bit of like a pressure cooker, to be honest. But it's just like if you can survive that pressure cooker, you come out like very refined, right? So, and not many people can do this because it requires an ungodly amount of time, invest in knowledge, like just just learn all the things like crazy, because there's too many aspects to an open source project that you never plan for. And then the second one, last one I probably mentioned, is sort of like raising a team, building a community. If you do an open source project that is not as popular, I think you're probably okay. You'd be like a balanced human being. You just push the code when you want, and you're happy. You can improve it here one weekend after playing football or watching match. You can just push some code. Yeah, okay. But then when it gets popular, the thing that we don't talk about, I mean, I think it's not just about open source; it's just about life in general. When anything you make becomes popular, you don't really consider the price of that thing. We just look at the reward. Like, oh, it's popular, I'm not a popular guy. But hey, don't forget about the downside of that as well. In the sense of like how do you manage the pressure, the expectations of people when that situation happens. So trying to sort of like overcome that pressure and expectation, and set a boundary between you and the open source, because you don't want to make sure you're not the open source project. It's just one thing you
Yeah.
did. So trying to sort of split out that identity can be a sort of a challenge when your project takes off like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Thank you very much, Shekhar. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the questions from the community and this, because I see we have limited time and we can keep going all and on. There are tons of questions. We probably won't get to them. And I'm sure, I mean,
Okay.
if we don't get to your question, please feel free to still leave your comments. We can attend to them later. So I will just pick one of the questions from the community. First one is, do you work on open source full time now, or do you still have a regular job? If the latter is yes, how do you manage to get all this open source work done?
Yeah, so I gave some context to this earlier, which is the fact that I love like my freelance life. So I tried to be as independent as possible. I have to confess, I've tried like traditional like 9 to 5, but it's just a thing where it's like we're not best friends. We can cut for a while, maybe a few months to a year, but like we're not really best of friends. But I mean, I'm always welcome to experiences. Like, I mean, I'm currently sort of like working within a company right now. I mean, and it's been an interest, even though it's sort of like a contract basis. So it's kind of like I prefer contract basis type of job where I get to do them for a fixed period of time and dedicate my time to open source, because at the level of open source that I do, it's really hard to combine that with like a full time job. I mean, you have to be a machine before you can do that. Right?
Yeah, that's true. All right. So the next question is, what would you say is the best way to start contributing to Chakra UI?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. I would say that like the easiest way, as with any project, is to look through the issues. Look through the list of issues, look through the list of discussions, and just be helpful. Like answer questions. If you know Chakra, you've used Chakra before, and you have some experience, just look there and try to help other people. That's the best way. I mean, it's not about sending me. Some folks try to just send me a message that, hey, I want to contribute, but hey, the real contributors are already contributing. You're not going to just like come show up from nowhere and start contributing. So get involved by answering questions and helping people.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think I would also add for you there, because I just recently joined your Discord server. So if you're interested, also you could do that and then see what people are doing, see how people already work with the community in that sense. All right. So I
Totally.
just asked one of my questions now. You kind of already touched point on this about time and how you manage the multi. Well, maybe not really, but I think you have,
No,
because
not
you did
really.
mention
Yeah.
the. Yeah, not really. So maybe you want to give it a go. How do you manage your time across multiple open source projects?
Yeah, this is a big one actually, because it's something I still struggle with. I have to say, like, I don't have like a full-fledged answer, but the way I'm thinking about this today is like I try to um there's just this general mantra that I have. It's kind of like it's very common. Like if you want to go fast, like you can just go alone. But if you want to really go far and do something that's amazing, you have to do it with a team of people. All right. So I generally tend to sort of like just share my ideas with a team of people that I know that like they've proven themselves, they've contributed over and over again. Just like spread myself out or try and replicate myself in other folks by openly sharing my ideas and stuff to them, and they contribute back to the project. And right now, the things I do is to just like hand over the spotlight to other people instead. Right. So it's like for new projects, I tend to not be like light and shiny armor for all of them. Like just like let other people actually lead the project and sort of be the one coordinating like all the different projects behind the scenes. So now I'm at the point where I'm okay behind the scenes. I don't need to be like, I mean, the one at the forefront of every single project, but I contribute massively to all of them.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. So teamwork, build a team, and collaboration. All right,
Yeah,
we've
correct.
discussed this already, so we'll just skip this. I mean, people say the second hardest thing in computer science is naming things. So how do you come up with names for your open source projects?
From the cartoons I watch, actually, it's not so hard. It's not as hard as you think. maybe, maybe when you're writing code, it's like very hard to name variables and stuff. But for projects specifically, I just look for the. I mean, the name Panda CSS, for example. I just went out with my wife to watch Kung Fu Panda, and we loved it. I'm just like, I must use that name Panda. I just like it. But what am I going to add to it? Okay, this is CSS framework. So I just put CSS behind that, and I buy the domain name, and that's it. For Chakra, it's the same. I love Naruto anime. I just find a good name from there. That's always the easiest way I find names, actually.
All right, so that sounds interesting. So just pick one from the community. This one says, "Do you have an estimate for when Chakra UI version 3 would be released?" And also, thank you for the gift of Chakra UI, Arc UI, etc.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's been a long stretch of a journey to get this V3 thing out. But kind of, I mean, personally speaking, I'm looking at I mean, within the next month or so. But as with all things code, I mean, you never can tell. But we've been on this for quite a while, where I'm pretty close to the point where I can tell. So I'm kind of like looking within the next month or so. We should start to see at least some teasing of Chakra V3 and eventually the launch shortly.
All right, that sounds cool. We're looking forward to that. So this question says, "Does writing API wrappers for companies with commercial products count as open source?"
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, anything that adds value to someone else, anything that makes your life easier for someone else counts as value, right? So it counts as a valuable open source project, right? But I think, of course, you just want to be sure that like someone has not done that already, and there's no like popular project doing that kind of in some way, shape, or form. If you can identify someone already doing that, you might want to consider like contributing or collaborating instead. Because again, I mean, with all these things, like it might actually be a window for you to get a job at that company, right? So I mean, go ahead, make it open source, do the work, and actually, don't just do the work and keep quiet about it. Make noise about it. Tag the company on Twitter, if possible. Let them know about the work you do, and doors of opportunity may actually come up at least for you from that angle. And even if not, you've learned the skill of open source. It's a skill you learn. Once you learn it, it never leaves you. So please go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. So the next question says, "Building a desktop application or web application and releasing it as open source makes it subject to forks. How does the project remain relevant?" It's like open source makes sense for tooling, but not for products.
Oh, well, that's a deep conversation. I mean, we could talk about this one for
Yeah.
30 minutes to an hour if we want. But I think like the argument in favor of open source is the fact that because the source is open, people trust that. People can trust that. Okay, this guy has good intentions. I mean, about the project, and you also open. I mean, as much as you're worried about the forks and people just like steal your idea and go away and just jackbar and go and make their own version of it, you should also see the positive side of that, which is like people contributing and people finding bugs at the rate that is faster than you, and even people fixing bugs at a rate that you can never fix. So you should see it as a way of like, I mean, quote unquote, getting free work done. Like just if you launch the scene and it was closed source, you have to do all the maintenance work yourself. But if you intend to make it open source, you get work for free. Of course, it comes at the risk of people that just want to copy and I mean, a copy of that. But I don't think you should be too careful about that, because to be honest, ideas go around. I mean, if you hold too tightly to this idea, I mean, someone else would most likely have it at some point and make something similar. So it's never a competition. The fact that React is open source does not mean Google would not work on Angular or something like, even though they are equally big, massive companies. So like, just feel free to try it out if you have the impressions to, at least.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you very much. The next question says, what are some of the best ways of financing and keeping your project alive?
Oh, I mean, those are two big questions again. These are really nice questions. Where are you guys getting them from? Yeah, so I think the answer is it's kind of like very simple, but I can expand on it as much as you want. But the thing is, like, you, the creator, should not run out of steam, and that's one. And you, the creator, should not run out of money. I think if you run out of any of these two things, the project dies by default. Right. And maybe I'll add, you shouldn't run out of that initial ginger or excitement you had about the project. If you lose it at some point, then the project just dies a natural death. Or you don't have money, you're broke. Forget that project. It's not going anywhere. You're just going to focus on your life instead of the project. So try to actually like sort out. I mean, just from a mental standpoint, make sure that like you have your own life sorted out behind the scenes on the back end at least. If you are okay on the back end, the front end, which is the project itself, will do pretty well. Even if no one contributes to it, at least you have enough time to maintain that over time. And trust me, it always happens after a few months of working open source, people show up and they want to help you. So it's that's just how it works. I don't know what's behind it, but it just works that way. Once you put it out, people will show up. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. All right. So, from experience with Chakra UI and the other projects, what strategies do you use to encourage contributions? I think you already just gave one strategy now, put it out and then people show up. But do you do anything else to get people to contribute to Chakra UI? Any extra efforts?
I think just be responsive to folks that ask questions or folks that maybe like are curious about it. Because before someone uses it, they have to try it out maybe on their side projects. And while they try it, they maybe open an issue, open a conversation. Just be responsive there as much as possible. And if you can't be responsive, find people that can help you be responsive. In any way, it's just like open source is kind of like the free version of running a company. It's weird. It's a weird analogy, but that's just how it works. Like people ask you questions, and you have to be there to sort of support and answer, whether it's Twitter or Discord or any of these places. You just have to be responsive. That's one way, and of course, also ask for help, which is pretty obvious. Like create a ticket that says I need help about X and X. Not many people will show up, of course, because people prefer to be spectators than being involved. But like, I mean, as you do that, the more you are open, more people will show. Few people that show up will be able to help you. I think I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right. I think we've answered this already. I think we've answered this a little bit. What's one fun fact about you? Let's go a little bit soft.
Oh boy, that is. Yeah, I'm
That
not even
sounds
sure
like
where to
there's no
start.
fun
I kind
fact
of.
about you.
I'm not that dry, at least. I mean, I think I watch anime a little too much sometimes.
Okay.
That's like
That's a
something that's
dangerous
kind of like,
fact.
I mean, yeah, that's like one fun fact about me, to be honest. Yeah, I just love animes and I watch them a lot, even way more than normal movies, I guess. Yeah.
All right, that's interesting. You're speaking to someone who has probably not watched any anime before, so that's fine.
Oh boy, we can slug it out for hours.
All right. So next question would be, what advice would you give to developers looking to create their first open source project?
Yeah, so this advice would be like, I mean, I'll kind of like scope down the advice to folks from Africa specifically. And I think the way I put this is, don't be afraid to do this. Like, just do it. Like, it doesn't get more complex than that. To be honest, I can try to make it very complicated and all this stuff, but you have to take the first step, which is just make it open source. And it doesn't matter what the idea is. Just whatever idea has come to your mind, just put it out there first, and you improve and watch yourself improve. as a result. Don't be afraid to put it out. Talk about it very frequently on social, because people are very distracted these days. Even if you talk about it once, it just goes off their mind the next hour. All right, so you want to actually be very active. Talking about it, and of course, don't ignore documentation. Don't ignore, like, even if you have a good source code, like, you have to document it well. Perception is a major contributor to reality. I won't say perception exactly is reality. So you have to make sure your project is perceived right. If you have a guy, like one of your guys that's a designer, let them get you to brand. Let them help you brand your project. I mean, give it a nice logo, give it a nice name, find a nice website. Like, stuff you would do to attract a customer in real life is what you have to do here as well. Plus, I also want to just say that, like, us folks from Africa in general, like, I mean, I want us to be known for high quality work. So, like, even though you put in all the work in the code, you have to also do the same amount of work in the presentation, right? So it's kind of like, just like you put there, treat it like an actual product, and I mean, make it as nice as an actual product. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really insightful advice. Thank you very much, Shago. So this one, I mean, it's definitely going to be a very broad conversation. Also, we have just like less than 3 minutes. But what are some effective ways to monetize open source projects without compromising their reliability and accessibility from your own experience running multiple projects?
Yeah. The first way I'd say is kind of like, don't focus on monetizing it yet. I mean, at the beginning, which is sort of like, focus on building the audience, focus on building the reputation, focus on, just like you put there, being reliable. Like, your library is reliable. As I change from version to version, I'm not seeing unpleasant surprises. Like, you need to actually prove yourself that you're a worthy engineer in that sense. Like, you're not just doing things as you want or as it just occurs to you. You actually follow due process in how you actually, like, version and do change logs for your product or for your project. And then once you build that momentum, then you have to actually, like, go figure out, what do I do with this trust that the community has given me now. All right, you can decide to go, like, okay, I'm gonna maybe consult at an interesting hourly rate. Just pick whatever hourly rate, and people can consult with you because you made the library. Or I can take on free projects. Companies that use my project and hire me. That's also another way. Companies actually do that. So they use your project, they hire the maintainer, and they pay them salary for that. Like, how cool would that be? Like, if you just working in a company and they're paying you to maintain your stuff. Like, it's really nice. And of course, the other ways is, like, I mean, sell a course, build stuff on top of your project. It's a bit stressful to do because you already have your project, then you're adding this extra thing again. But if you're able to balance it out, like, the rewards are sort of like, enormous, I'd say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shagun. I know we want to be on time, so just take this last question from someone from the comments. We have like tons of other questions for you. Probably we'll find some other way to get them. Find some other way to get them across, and then you could respond to them. This one's from Justice says, "How do you become a framework dev?" And I guess that also refers to building a library, like you've done.
Yeah, I mean, you probably don't want to focus on building a library again. It's just like the previous question: how do you monetize? The answer is always like, don't think about monetizing like right away, because your motive is already exposed. Like, once that is exposed, that just means that you're just here to chop money and go. Like, I mean, but here in this case, how do you become a framework dev? I think the purpose of frameworks is to improve people's speed, performance, efficiency when it comes to actually, like, launching a product. So you first have to, like, you need to have the experience of that product side. Like, what are the frictions that people are having with, I mean, with whatever the tool is. In my case, it was like, people, I mean, back in the day, people used to struggle with component libraries. How do I style them? How do I override them? There are not too many components. And I just go, okay. I mean, I've worked with developers already real time that have these issues. So I just reverse engineer that process to make something from that. So it's always a thing of, you don't start with this as the goal. You start from the end result, which is, you want to help people do stuff faster, understand the problems and the bottleneck, and then work your way back to a framework that solves that problem. And that's how you build a framework ultimately.
All right. Thank you very much, Shagun. If you can take this last one, we'll end here and then we would let you go. How did think the open source ecosystem will evolve in the next few years? You can look at it from the African landscape or globally.
Yeah, that kind of just dialing on Africa in general. The global space is big enough for the world to think about, but I think like the from Africa, I think that I think the landscape would evolve and get better over time. We'll start to see more folks create major projects in open source because right now it's a scarcity problem we're having. The open source community globally, I mean, or say in the US market, is a major driver for the SaaS ecosystem, right? So, but then, I mean, which is one of the key pieces we missed in Africa, which is like we don't have much of that. So we just rely on the global infrastructures that come from there. But if we can actually sit
Yeah.
and build ours, I mean, I think that would be a key cornerstone to even our startup ecosystem as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Shegu. And just as he's mentioned, if you have ideas, please feel free to join the Open Source Community Africa. That's what we do. We help people, leverage open source and do more. And we want to see more. And that's the whole point behind our entire community. And we want to see more come out from the African region. So thank you very much once again, Shegun. It's nice having you. And I know we couldn't cover
Yeah, no
most of our
worries.
questions. So please feel free if you want to check out Shegun's work. You can find the link to his website here and check out all the other projects. Many links have been going on and on. If you do have more questions, feel free to join our Discord server and we'll also, be ready to respond to you. And yes, it's nice having you all today and we look forward to having you in the next one. Thank you once again, Shagan, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Paul G. Excited to be here and to answer all the smart questions. Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much, everyone, and do have a nice day.